Hiyo and Iwana. Buenos dias, mi gente. Hi, Taos. Welcome back again for our summer series in the Valle, Prejudice and Reconciliation in Taos. We're here today with pesky horsefly originator Mr. Bill Whaley, also runs Taos Friction, and is a professor here at UNM Taos. And he's here to share his thoughts and his wisdom and his experience on prejudice and systemic racism and all the cool stuff we've been talking about lately. Now, Mr. Whaley, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself, please?
Well, let's see. I grew up in northern Nevada on a ranch. My stepfather had a ranch, and he hired lots of Native Americans, Washoe Indians, we called them then, And when I moved to Taos, I dropped out of Colorado College 1966 and moved to Taos to ski.
Yeah.
Because I was eligible for the draft,
Oh,
and
man.
they wanted me to go to Vietnam after I passed my physical, but there were openings in the National Guard in Taos, so I joined the Guard, and that's why I stayed. My exposure there, I was like the fourth Anglo in the Guard at that time. There were four of us, I think. So I got to know the local community, and I always figured that. Plus, I was young, useful, and rambunctious, and prone to get into trouble, and occasionally get thrown in jail in other places, but never in Taos. I found the people here exceedingly tolerant and friendly and hospitable, and I figured they saved my life. And so
that's not just any. That's not something just anybody can say about Taos, not being thrown in jail in Taos.
Well, the cops always said things like, well, you think you're sober enough to drive home? Or, so I got into lots of trouble, but not with the law so much,
I know, I've heard some of your stories, man, and they are great. Now, so we're here today to talk about systemic racism, prejudice, and reconciliation in our valley here. And it's something that we've taken up very passionately because, we want to keep our community wholesome as it's been. We've had a sort of harmony happening here in our little valley for hundreds of years, and we want to protect that. Seeing the way the rest of the world is starting to tear itself apart due to the pandemic, different movements that are happening, BLM. Those sort of things. So my first question to you, Mr. Whaley, is, does Taos suffer from systemic racism?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I've thought a lot about that, and I could never figure it out. Because, as you know, we have these three cultures living together in sort of mutual cooperation to some extent, hostility in others. I mean, there is historic hostility on both sides of the cattle guard, you might say.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think it's systemic so much because for it to be systemic, there has to be a dominant culture,
Mm.
And I've never felt that one culture was more dominant than another. I mean, the Hispanic culture was dominant politically for a long time. That's sort of eroding now, And of course, Taos Pueblo's dominant on that side of the cattle guard. And so I know there's prejudice here, there's kind of petty prejudice and bigotry, and people who visit or people who move here from other places bring their own prejudices, And as we know, no matter how liberal or how generous people are, there are microaggressions,
Mm.
I mean, it's hilarious. I used to hear it all the time in county commission meetings and Kit Carson cooperative meetings, from the board of trustees or from the commissioners and stuff. But the thing that always struck me right from the beginning when I moved here was people would make remarks, let's say about the hippies, and the hippies came. But by the same token, somebody might say, you'd be talking and somebody'd say, well, that guy's just a hippie. And somebody else at the bar would say, well, he's not a hippie, I know him. So it's like individually, people got along good with each other very often. But as you know, the neighbors fight too, right? I mean,
right.
the El Prado Parciantes and the Parciantes from the Pueblo on the other side, so.
Always button heads over that.
So I don't see it as systemic, though I think, of course, systemic racism exists in the country, obviously. It always floors me, I have to tell you, since I grew up with Native Americans and then moved to Taos, it always floors me when I hear that there are people in this country who didn't know there were still Indians in America. I find that very strange.
Oh man, I learned that at a very young age. I was about maybe 7 years old, and we were having breakfast at downtown Senyo when it was across the street from where it exists now. You remember when it used to be that little diner there on the corner?
Yeah.
Of Herdner, I think. Herdner, right?
Yeah.
And we're in there, and a group of tourists come in, group of visitors come in, and they sit down next to us, and they're eating their dinner and their breakfast, and the whole time less proximity away from me than you are right now. And the dad gets up and says, "All right, everybody, you guys ready to go see some Indians?" And the little girl, I remember her distinctly saying, "Daddy, I thought there was none left."
Really?
And I'm sitting there and I'm like, "Hey kid, I'm right here. Nice to meet you,"
Yeah.
And so, I feel you on that one.
Well, I had a lot of Chicano friends here who told me when they went to places like Tucumcari and stuff, sometimes they couldn't get served, So, and that was in like the 60s, and I don't know about the 70s, but
I can't imagine something like that happening in New Mexico, but I reckon it probably did.
Eastern New Mexico.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you meet some of the people from the eastern New Mexico and southeastern New Mexico, and it's kind of redneck down there,
It's a little different.
Yeah, it is different. Yeah.
Well, you catch it all here in New Mexico, right? I mean,
you have a cross culture, cross section,
Now, for yourself, what, if any, forms of racism or prejudice have you experienced while here in Taos?
Well, I think it reminds me of my own hometown, where when newcomers would come to town, people sort of, say something about them like they're a visitor. Of course, in the 60s, there was some hostility toward Anglos, gringos, whatever. Hey, gringo, like that. But I always figured, well, I'm in somebody else's place, So I read this book called A Child's History of the World when I was a kid, and I always remembered the line, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do," so, and when in Taos, do as the Taoseños do.
That's right.
And it's not that I didn't get harassed or anything, I mean, even in the Guard, but then that was sort of like a form of, like a rite of passage or something, you felt. So, I don't know, I always felt like I was treated pretty good, I mean, yeah, I went in places like, I remember going in Los Compadres one time, and it was strictly Hispanic, Chicano bar, and at that time. And some guy started giving me trouble, but then one of my friends from the Guard was there, and he said, "Oh, that's Whaley, I know him, he's okay." And so, like...
And you got your pass there, huh?
I got my pass, yeah. If you knew somebody, you got a pass, see.
That's kind of how Taos is, though,
Right,
the whole
right.
Not what you know, who you know kind of thing.
Very definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've been treated very well in that respect. I have a lot of stories in my book, Gringo Lessons, about locals helping me out,
That's why I get a lot of the funny tidbits about you.
Right.
Now, okay, so that being said, we were talking about back then, 60s, 70s, civil rights and all that stuff, the war and all that. Do you see any reflections from the past happening now, like with the BLM and other movements like that are happening, other protests?
Well, I think a couple years ago, UNM sent me to a thing called Equity that UNM Highlands and Adams State puts on, and it's all about being sensitive to sexism, classism, racism, GLBTI, and all that stuff. And what you realize is you inherit from the dominant culture, especially if you're a white person. You inherit certain things that you're not always conscious of, like microaggressions. Like, sometimes between men and women there are problems, and men don't always behave well. They're not as sensitive as they should be. I'm sure you may have heard that.
Yeah, like this morning when my wife was saying, "You got to go do another interview."
Yeah, exactly.
I promised her some weekend fun time.
So we're always learning, We're always learning, and I think that the Black Lives Matter thing, I'm really happy for it. I mean, it feels like we're going through the 60s again. It's not like we haven't been down this road before, you know, with civil rights and, you know, we passed the voting rights, all that stuff in the 60s. And then Martin Luther King and, you know, Vietnam, we had all these marches, all these anti-war marches, all these anti-poverty marches, and anti-racism and all that stuff. So it's very similar to me, you know. Except it's the people are younger and more mixed, maybe. But there was a lot of, you know, a lot of white people tried to help out going on marches too, you know, in the South and stuff. I was a little bit too young for that and too far removed. But
right. Now, you said that it kind of it makes you happy to see these kind of things going on.
Right.
Now,
right. Well, I'm against injustice.
In what way? I mean.
Well, I think there's a great deal of injustice in this country. You know, there is systemic racism. I mean, both Native Americans and African Americans suffer from systemic racism. It's totally unfair. You know, all the money's concentrated in the hands of a few. It's gotten worse and worse and worse for the last. Really, since Reagan, it's accelerated. You know, it continued. The gap continued to widen. You know, under Bush and under Clinton, under Bush and under Obama.
Yeah.
You know.
I remind you how
it all is derived from. To me, it's all derived from capitalism because it profits capitalism to keep the working classes at each other's throats. You know, so they promote it. I believe the propaganda and everything promotes racism in this country, systemic racism.
And that's the bottom line right there, from systemic racism, right?
Right.
I mean, it's keeping masses in control.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. Now, in your opinion, how well has President Trump handled the current situation with the Black Lives Matter movement, and the pandemic, and
to me, President Trump is not only is he using race to stimulate his base in his favor, but he himself, I believe, is a white power guy. You know, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt. You know.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at like family history and
family history. His father was sued for civil rights violations. You know, discriminating against black people in their apartments in New York, and you know.
The whole slumlord thing.
Yeah, the slumlord thing. Yeah, exactly. And now he's threatening suburban housewives with the specter of black and brown people moving into the suburbs. You know, so that's his latest campaign point. So
terrible. What solutions would you like to see implemented to heal the ancestral trauma that? And that minorities, not just here, but you know, all over the country and here, how would you go about healing that, starting that healing process with them?
Well, you know, I've always liked that model. I don't exactly know how it worked, but I like that model of truth and reconciliation that Mandela, Bishop Tutu in South Africa promoted. You know, where people get together and talk about it. And you know, you're not going to cure everything in one generation or anything. But obviously, the younger people are more and more tolerant, more and more open-minded. They don't even think about it. You know, a lot of younger people, the generation younger than we are even, and so I think that's what you have to do. I think people need to hear it. You know, obviously, white people are hearing it. Some of them for the first time, which is shocking to me. But you know, they think this is unfair, unjust. You know.
Right.
You know, what's been, especially, you know, I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement has gotten all the oxygen, but, you know, people understand Standing Rock and, you know, all that stuff. So it's getting more airplay, but it's going to take education too. And the current political situation is so awful, you know, with the gridlock in Washington and the factionalism between Democrats and Republicans. We're going to see a huge change at this election if we get an election. I mean, you know, if the fascists don't seize power, you know, the fascists being Trump, you know.
It's a little scary to think about that. There might not be a vote.
Well, I think there will be a vote, but I think it could be challenged or it could be repressed. I think it'll be repressed. And, you know.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah, it's scary. It's like what's going on in Portland, you know.
Oh yeah, man, that stuff is crazy going
Right.
on up there. They snatching people off the streets.
Right.
Secret service kind of people.
Well,
a secret police force.
Yeah, but Juan, it's not the first time in this country.
No, no.
I mean, you probably remember what happened at the San Geronimo at the Taos Pueblo in 1847, I think.
Yes, yeah. When we destroyed the church.
Yeah.
When the army
came in and destroyed
150 men, women, and children inside the church being bombarded by, I believe it was Lieutenant Price.
Right.
One of them, I can't remember, but
Right.
I know Price was
Right.
involved in some degree. But yes, well, that's interesting. That's interesting that you bring that up because, there's a lot of craziness and sensationalism going on right now with, statues being removed, certain historical figures,
Right.
Columbus,
Right.
Robert E. Lee. People are calling for the disassembly of Mount Rushmore. Even right here in our own community, people want to change the name of Kit Carson Park to something else. And as well with the Padre Martinez statue on the plaza. How do you feel, what do you feel is the best route to meet those kind of demands?
Well, I think specifically, especially locally, locally we always get the short end in terms of like local history, like I've taught sort of Taos culture courses at UNM and also sort of in the community because there's lots of books written about Taos, lots of great books, and I think education, I think lectures, education. When they tried to, they fumbled the attempt to to change the name before, because the council was new and you'd have thought they were born in Albuquerque or something. I don't know. They didn't think of maybe asking the pueblo to what they thought, And I think we should have a series of seminars, I think once a month. I really think the town or somebody or the university should sponsor lectures once or twice a month about the history of Taos and get really good people. I mean, the Historical Society has little things that they do at Kit Carson, and that's fine. But there's some incredibly interesting people who have either written books about Taos or lecture and know a lot about it, and some live here and some don't. And you could really create an interesting series of lectures. And also you could have some open forums and discuss it. Like, we're going to change the name of the park. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about Kit Carson. Let's tell the truth about Kit Carson as much as we know. Let's talk. What about the? I know why people are so exercised about Kit Carson. I mean, and we know why our friends in the Dine are angry about that.
Oh yeah.
But on the other hand, there were a lot of shifting alliances at that time. And maybe the Utes don't feel the same way about Kit Carson that the Navajos feel like, because Kit Carson was responsible for getting the Utes their reservation early on, because they were his scouts and stuff. So he went to bat for him in Washington when he went back there.
I hear it all the time. Being a tour guide at the Pueblo, you hear it's one of the questions that I get asked regularly. How do you feel about Kit Carson? What's your opinion?
What do you say?
What's your opinion on him? I immediately tell them to read Blood and Thunder.
Right.
I think Blood and Thunder is the quintessential book to read about Kit Carson because it gives the reader the opportunity to draw their own conclusion of how they feel about the man himself as opposed to the legend of Kit Carson. You hear a lot about what he did to the Navajo, to the Dene population, and I often wonder how many friends he had from my tribe.
Well, he had
a handful,
yeah.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
He probably did have some enemies because Taos is like that.
Right.
Back then, he would have been, that's just that gringo, Kit Carson. I don't like him. He drinks too much, or slept with my cousin.
Right.
Something like that.
Right.
He had how many wives?
Yeah.
And I don't think none of them were white. So yeah, I can imagine that he probably
he had an Arapaho wife and or were they both Arapaho?
One, I think the first two were Arapaho, and the next the ending one was a Hispanic lady, right?
Right.
So yeah, I reckon he probably was victim to some of those small little ancestral prejudices that exist here in Taos. You know,
Right.
like he would have been, oh, I don't like him that much. You know,
Right.
And then there's another person from the pueblo who goes, oh, that's Kit Carson. He's an all right guy. He comes to eat at my grandma's table for San G. You know, so
and he also helped us fight our enemies. You know, I mean, the Navajos didn't have like a good reputation along the Upper Rio Grande. You know, raiding villages and
they certainly didn't have a good reputation with my people either.
Yeah,
I mean, so at the time,
yeah.
But times do change, and
right.
You know, yeah.
That's one of the things I've never liked that term. You know, they try to excuse people because he was a person of his time. You know, well, that's true. And Kit Carson bowed to authority. You know, he was a little intimidated by the military. You know, and by Fremont and by I can't remember Carleton and he and Sherman had similar ideas. You know, Sherman was a military governor. You know, Sherman who marched to the sea in the Civil War from Atlanta to the sea, the scorched earth policy, which Kit Carson adopted to. That was the only way they could, you know, conquer the Navajos, at least on the western portion. But yeah, so I really think that would be a very interesting series of seminars. You know,
sort of like a TED Talks, but Taos Talks.
Taos Talks.
And I believe at some point some group actually had something like that going on at the Harwood or somewhere.
No, there was some SMU UNM talks at the Harwood.
Yes.
They were actually quite good, but there were. I even took one of my classes there one night, and but there were only 4. You know, and you can't and you know SMU has done some nice things in the summer out there, but you can't exhaust the subject with 4 talks. You know what I mean?
No, you can't.
I mean, you should have one a month. There should be one good one a month that would ignite conversation. You know.
Well, that's what we're here today, man. We're hoping to kickstart something like that going on with our series in the Valle, and moving on. Let's see here. Well, what about the statues, though? I mean, we haven't really said too much.
Well, you know, I think all
do we take
those,
them down? Do we?
Well, listen. I think I had no idea really that until recently. You know, you hear about the Civil War statues, for instance. You hear about those, but I haven't toured out there. I haven't done a Civil War. I did do a Civil War battlefield at Chattanooga, Tennessee once, but I didn't realize that they were all erected recently, you know, and that they were put up there to intimidate black people, you know. So, and I do see good reasons for tearing those down. Now, when you have statues like Oñate and stuff like that, I understand why they tore it down. On the other hand, I think I still think it's an opportunity for debate, you know, or debate, teaching, discussion, whatever, you know. But you know,
Sort of a philosophical thing to get into.
Well, yeah, because I think, you know, I think sometimes something provokes you historically, you know, so you talk about it, you know. It'd be nice if people actually, if everyone read Blood and Thunder. I know a lot of people have read Blood and Thunder, actually. I mean, at least that book, you know, a lot of people have read. It's a great book. It's a fast read. It's exciting, and it teaches you all about the West and the history of this area. And it's heartbreaking because by the time Kit Carson gets to Canyon de Chelly, you know, where he didn't go into Canyon de Chelly, he sent somebody else. Mm-hmm. I think he was afraid of getting cursed or something. You know,
I would imagine so, man. I mean,
he was
even back then.
He was hip enough to understand that, but you know, he still gets blamed for cutting down peach trees as he should. But it's heartbreaking because up until that point, you think, well, he's a pretty good guy. I mean, he did have one. He had one screw up against the. I've forgotten the name, but when they were in the, he and Fremont. I think the first time they went to California, they killed some tribal members up there who they thought had killed a couple of their buddies, and they got the wrong guys. And you saw that bloodlust, you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the book. Yeah. But before you get to the Long March and everything, you think you're beginning to think, well, Kit Carson's not so bad, you know. He's pretty heroic, you know. He's pretty amazing to watch. And then it's just heartbreaking, you know. I mean, I think Hampton Side did a good job.
I think so.
You know, I think it's fair. And that book has 25 pages of notes or something.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a research vehicle.
It's a good book. It's a good book. Now, in your opinion, what steps does Taos need to take to preserve its most unique quality, its cultural diversity?
Well, once again, I think it's education. I think we got to get people out of this. It's so boring. The elected officials are unimaginative for the most part. All they ever think about is economic development, right? But it's always short-term thinking. I mean, the co-op got a call center, and of course that didn't work out. It's stuff like that, and I think that Taos should focus on history and culture. That's what a lot of people enjoy. That they come here for that. It all fits together, and I think there should be more emphasis on that. And the thing is, it doesn't cost anything. It's not like putting on concerts in the park or something. I think that's all a waste of time. There's a great club scene here. Promote the club scene. In the 70s, there was a good club scene, and people used to really enjoy coming and hearing musicians who were local, because they didn't have them in their town. I mean, that was interesting to people. There's good little theater, there's lots of grassroots culture,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's what's important, and I do think, I suppose I'm prejudiced because I'm a semi-academic, but I think history and culture and art and all that stuff goes together, and I think that's what should be promoted. I think it's great that you've been writing stories about this whole younger generation of Pueblo artists. Otherwise we wouldn't know about them. You always hear about, that a certain group gets to a certain point and they become kind of the establishment. And
the bigger names, the ones that have been out there, Robert Maribal, Jonathan Warmday, the Bernie Tracks of the world.
Right.
Well,
they're all good friends of mine,
Same here.
But it's nice that Donnie Paul and Shorty is coming up,
Yeah, that was awesome to hear. She, her and Cameron Martinez have taken the path less traveled, I think. When you think of Native American artists, your mind immediately goes towards pottery and crafts and some sort of traditional art framework.
Right.
Whereas those two have gone into media and film, and it's just cool.
Right.
It's just cool to me that they can diversify themselves that way.
Right.
So there's that,
No, I think that's where the emphasis should be in the community. It's taken it used to be really hard to get. It's hard to cross those barriers sometimes. I don't know, for some reason there's always been a barrier to art between the kind of the bourgeois business people and the politicians and the artists, and it's changed a lot. People are much more open to it now, but there's a whole bunch of things that they just don't have very much vision in the community. The mayor has the mayor's a logger.
Yeah, he's a.
He has some nice art in his house, and he's a good guy, and we've managed to get a little art up in the courthouse and stuff like that, but it's nothing like it could be.
I can imagine so. Even my own dad, he's a tremendous fellow, but as far and he is quite crafty. I've been there helping him tie drums. I've seen him make peace pipes. I've seen him make bows and arrows. I've seen him be very crafty when it comes to working with his hands. But at the same time, I would never expect to see him at a poetry slam, or at a literary event, or even a exhibit for an artisan, for a painter or something like that. I would never expect to see him in that kind of crowd rubbing elbows like that. I would expect to see him probably meeting up with the mayor up in the mountains and
they might maybe
maybe crack open a cola, and after they saw down a few dead and down trees.
Right.
I can totally see something like that. I would like to see a little bit more emphasis on our arts and culture.
Right.
Just because you're right, it is the thing that people come here for. It's one thing that Taos has been put on the map. With D.H. Lawrence and the rest of his crowd.
Right.
And everybody that came through,
You know, Lawrence wrote some really interesting stuff about, in his way, because he's a great artist. I think he captures the kind of the essence of Native American culture on a kind of metaphysical level, you know, on a very profound sort of level. He recognized it, you know, he recognized what he saw as he did art and everything, you know, and I think that can all be translated so that people should grow up with it. I mean, it amazes me when I teach my classes and the kids don't even know that the flag flies 24/7 on the plaza. You know,
because of that whole Civil War thing.
Yeah. You know,
Civil
things
War
like that.
battle, right?
Right. Well, because Kit Carson, there were some Confederates and some Yankees, I guess, in Taos, and the Confederates wanted to pull the flag down, and Kit Carson and a few local guys stood there and defended it all night. So because they did that, Lincoln said, "Well, they can fly the flag 24/7 forever."
Yeah.
And we're one of 7 places, you know.
And it's cool too because I've often seen people on the plaza after hours, and that flag is still up, you know, and it perplexes them, and it's funny to see them walking down the plaza. You know, they're just in awe that it's still up.
Right.
And for the longest time, even myself, I never knew why it flew all the time. I just kind of thought it just got left.
Well, you know, people used to come by, especially like American Legionnaires, you know, they'd come over and they'd say, "Hey, you're supposed to take that flag down, you know, after sundown." We'd say, no, we get to fly it all the time. But why don't they make more of that, you know? I mean, the town ought to have a historian, you know. They always print, half the stuff they print and they flash around is wrong.
But would such a celebration be met with cheers or jeers, though? Because, I mean, we're talking about one of Kit Carson's accomplishments. You know, how would that be perceived? Would it? And I
well, you could leave him out of the mix. You don't have to tell everybody that.
That's what I was going to say. I would imagine
it's Lincoln. Get Lincoln's proclamation.
I think it would be all in the way of how the town would handle that sort of thing.
Right.
But it
well, see, that's one reason I like Kit Carson. He's so provocative.
It would be something good to celebrate, though, for the town. I mean,
Absolutely.
It is something that the town could use as sort of national media coverage. You know, because you're right. There's not a whole lot of places that can do this.
Right.
It would be nice.
Right.
It would be nice. Do you have any other words or any other wisdom that you'd like to share with our viewers, just in regards to everything that's been going on?
I think I'll tell you one thing. With all the turmoil in the rest of the country, it sure makes me happy I live in Taos. And I have to say, I think your dad as governor of the Pueblo, and I think Governor Lujan Grisham is doing a really good job. And I think that goes way back, taking care of your people first, you know. And I think that sets a really good example. And it makes me feel good living in Taos, living in New Mexico, you know, that people are strict about it, you know. I mean, there was just that piece in that some travel magazine wrote something about Taos, and there was some guy from Oklahoma was passing through, and he was irritated that he couldn't go to the Pueblo, you know.
Yeah, I read about that on NPR. They were talking about how Little Texas up the road there is just not complying with anything.
Right,
and
right.
The article went on and saw some highlights and talked about a lady who had come from Red River, visiting from Texas, came to Red River, drove up here to Taos, and just lost it at the checkpoint there because they didn't want to let her in.
Right.
And I wish I could have been there.
Right.
To see that? To see that little meltdown?
Hey, listen, if you go into the Speedway here in El Prado, there's at least one clerk in there, one woman in there. I've heard her yelling at people to put their mask on before they come in. I mean, it's like the whole town is into it. Oh, and you know, it's been great in the Taos News, in the police report. I love reading the police report.
Blah.
And last week there were like 4 or 5 calls to the cops on people not wearing masks, like in grocery stores, on the plaza. So you're not getting away with that stuff.
No, you're not. You're not. And working on the plaza, you hear a lot of it. You know, I don't want to do this. I think it's lame. I think it's taken away from our freedoms. And it's funny because when you're in the throes of conversation with those type of people, and then that little opinion slips out, oh, I really don't want to wear this thing. And for myself, I immediately have to kind of pull back the reins and go, okay, I can't take this conversation that way with this person because this person is, after all, a guest in my community,
right,
and should be treated with the proper amount of respect.
right.
So for myself, being in the tourism industry and seeing all these people come in still, this influx of visitors, I understand that it's a sort of lifeline for our community here. We are a tourism-based community.
Right.
Same thing at the Pueblo. I'm worried. I'm worried for my people right now because of what's going on there. You know, I applaud my father's efforts because he shut down that border immediately
Right.
when it came to the States. He wasn't taking no chances.
Right.
However, I know that the Pueblo being shut down this long with its main moneymaker, that gate that visitors pay to get in,
Right.
I know next year we're going to be hurting financially. I know that, and I'm worried about it.
Right. Well, I think the whole community is you know,
And I would say, yeah, I would agree with
the
that.
moratorium on evictions has just expired, you know, and so things are tough. They're going to be tough, and that's another reason, for, you know, to have these kind of community meetings or historic discuss history or something, because you know you want people to all stay on the same page, you know.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, let me ask you this, Bill. Let me ask you this: do you see any benefits coming out of what's our overall global situation?
Well, I if the economic system changes, I would think that would be a benefit. You know, I think we ought to elevate health, not profits. You know, I mean, I think we ought. You know, the evidence of what's happened to the environment, the improvement in the environment, at least from what I've read, cities where you no longer have smog, and you know, the fish and dolphins or something coming into the canals in Venice, and you know,
Right,
Italy,
right.
and things like that. So there are benefits, you know, and maybe this whole movement will have a shift and make the United States government more modest, you know, more moderate in their approach. I mean,
like it.
a lot of things Bernie advocated are certainly being laid out there for everybody in terms of the healthcare industry. You know,
It's kind of in your face now, and you can't
yeah.
really, you can't really deny what he was saying was
It's necessary.
was accurate.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
well, for myself, the benefit that I'm seeing is a lot of people returning to the earth and providing for themselves through those means. I see a lot more gardens. I see a lot more people working with their hands.
Right.
I see a lot of more bartering going on.
Right.
You know, goods for
Right.
services for goods.
Right.
And it makes me pretty proud of my people here in Taos. It makes me proud of y'all. Because
Well, boy, you sure saw them cleaning up, because you could hardly go to the dump this spring. Everybody, there was long lines out there.
That's what I'm
You know,
talking
everybody's
about.
cleaning out the brush and stuff.
everybody,
you know.
we got all those what I call anti-COVID projects.
Right.
Because you know, I mean, like we cleaned out all Dad's ditches
Right.
before planting season even began.
Right.
Fixed up the fences and
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah. No, they're. Yeah, and the certainly the home improvement stores, Ace Hardware and Randall's and everything, they're doing fine. You
I'm
know?
sure they are.
It's just a little different sector of the economy, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good. All that stuff's good, you know.
It's awesome.
I think we're going to see it. The early days of the shutdown, I'd drive back and forth to town in my office out here, and it reminded me of the '70s in the off season. You know, lack of traffic, not many people around. You know,
just Taos on its own, just like
yeah, and also you got to see the architecture and the buildings as you drive along, because there was no clutter, no traffic. You know, so you visually you could really see the community a lot better, and it was nice. You know, so
That's awesome, man. All right, Bill. I'd like to thank you for joining us on our series here in the Valle.
well. Thank you, Juan.
Thank you, man. Thanks for being a part of it, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience here in Taos with us. And thank you all, too, for tuning in again. And please catch us here again next week as we pursue more interviews and have more conversations with more of our brilliant minds here in Taos, New Mexico. And thank you all. Gracias. Ta. See you next time.